Traditionally, kilts are worn by Scottish soldiers in the Regiment of Scotland, by the monarchy when in Scotland at special events, such as the Braemar Gathering, and by grooms at their weddings. They are also worn at ceilidhs. But why do Scotsmen wear the kilt? The word kilt comes from an Old Norse word, kilta, meaning to lap over or gather skirts, so perhaps its history began when the Norsemen invaded the country, but there is no record of this. The first time the kilt in its modern form was mentioned was in the 16th century, but was then mainly the preserve of the Highlanders, as most Lowlanders wore different dress. Made from wool, which has natural oils to repel rainwater, it was simply a long piece of woven cloth wrapped around the body and held in place by a belt. The upper part was draped over the shoulder and hung down over the belt and gathered at the front. It could be used like a cape or pulled over the head to keep the inclement Scottish weather off the wearer. Shepherds wore these long pieces of cloth as they tended to their sheep on the hills, knowing it would keep them dry in the rain and warm in the winter. With more sheep, and as more wool became readily available in the 16th century, the fabric could be as long as 7 yards in length, or nearly 6.5 metres, and it was woven on hand looms before being sewn together to give a width double the size of the loom. This was known as the Great Kilt. Scots weren't the only ones to wear this long cloth of the 16th century, as it was recorded that the Irish wore something similar. In Ireland they've kept the tradition of plain kilts rather than the brightly coloured ones now seen in Scotland, which mainly stem from the 19th century, although regimental tartan was recorded in 1713. By the 18th century, the whole setup had developed, with the belt slipping through loops sewn into the garment to gather it up, and when undone, it became a blanket, which could be used if the person wearing it couldn't make it home. Kilts were also known to have had a drawstring belt on the inside for ease of release. Underneath them, men wore long-sleeved tunics. The benefit also extended to the lower part of the body. Traipsing through burns meant that only the feet got wet, and not the clothing. In battle, the Highlanders would remove the cloth and fight only in their war shirt, which they wore beneath it, usually made of leather, which ran down to their knees. Sometimes it would be made of linen or even canvas, but made in such a way as to protect the wearer from the sword or musket. After the Battle of Culloden on 16th April 1746, the Highlanders were stripped of their right to wear their traditional dress, bearing in mind they were Scots on both sides, and both wore the kilt. Men and boys were prohibited from wearing the kilt, although there was an exemption for the Highland regiments. Punishment for being found wearing it was 6 months' imprisonment for the first offence, or up to 7 years' transportation for repeat offenders. The law lasted over 3 decades. However, this put fire in the belly of the Highlanders and the Scots as a whole. The government had tried to suppress Scottish culture, and the Scots were determined to keep it alive. It wasn't until the end of the 17th century or early 18th century that the kilt as we know it today was worn. This was called the small or small kilt or wearing kilt. At the beginning of the 18th century, the small kilt, a single rather than double loom width of cloth, was used. This kilt hung down below the belt and was less cumbersome. Above the River Forth, Lowlanders embraced this new style of kilt, although the Highland men continued to wear the Great Kilt. It was also during this century the Highland regiments began wearing the kilt regularly, and it became known as the military kilt. The British Army allowed the men to wear them, but in some quarters they were looked upon with disdain, and a few wanted it banned from the military entirely. The origins of the small kilt is open to debate, with Ivan Bailey claiming in 1768 that it was introduced when Thomas Rawlinson went into business with Ian MacDonald of Glengarry to make charcoal using the local forests. The belted Great Kilt was too cumbersome for the work, so in the mid-1720s he got a tailor stationed with the army in Inverness to make the lower half of the garment only, with the pleats sewn into it. Sir John Sinclair of Ulster gives credence to this story. However, it didn't appear until 50 years after it was said to have been invented. It was deemed to simply be a legend, although later research brings that into doubt, so its origins are unknown. Rawlinson is the first to be recorded, and it's known he did indeed manufacture these small kilts. Following the lifting of the ban on Highland dress in 1782, there was a resurgence of wearing the kilt and tartan plaid, especially following the visit of George IV to Edinburgh in 1822. Sir Walter Scott organised the events for the visit, and tartan, kilts, and all things Highland were front and centre. During the reign of Queen Victoria, tartan was everywhere. She loved it, so much so she would wear tartan dresses and had Balmoral draped in tartan. Thanks to its resurgence in the 19th century, Scotland as a whole has embraced tartan and the kilt as part of its national identity, although we're not so keen on the fresh air in a can type of image. Scotsmen and women all over the world are proud to wear the kilt, a sign of their national identity, their history, and their heritage. And it's thanks to the Victorian age, clans have their own tartans, which allow the wearer to feel part of their Highland or Lowland clan. In reality, you can wear any kilt and any tartan you like, but always make sure it's no longer than the middle of the knee. As for the burning question, what do Scotsmen wear under their kilts? The answer traditionally is nothing, although many do cover their modesty today. It's no wonder enemies found the Scots frightening in battle. If you're thinking of buying a Scottish kilt, buy a traditionally handmade one in Scotland. If you enjoyed this episode of Scotland's History, please like, comment and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching.